presentations are kind of condensed today. I am the SWSA treasurer, and I want to thank you all for participating in our final day of the SWSA Professional Development Day. If you are seeking CEUs for today, could you please enter your name in the chat? There will be an evaluation survey at the end of the session entered into the chat, so please do not log off prematurely so you can fill that out. If you've already filled one out at one of the earlier sessions today, then you don't have to fill it out again. But if this is your first session today, please do fill it out. And I will give us about another minute to make sure everybody's here, and then I will go ahead and introduce both Dr. Brandt and Heidi at the same time, so then when Dr. Brandt's done, we can roll right into Heidi, so their time is good.
This is Kathy Ishcomer. I have a quick question.
Yes, ma'am.
Will the evaluation form cover all the workshops, or are we supposed to do one after each workshop?
Just one for the entire day. We'll give you.
Okay. Thank you.
Perfect. All right. So our first presenter will be Dr. Mary Brandt. She is the current faculty liaison for the BSW and MSW students. She regularly engages in supervising MSW graduates who are working toward their clinical license, many of whom are working in schools or through school-based agencies. Dr. Brandt takes a special interest in school-age children and their families. And our second presenter will be Heidi Pham. She is a OU alumni from the MSW program and is a practicing licensed clinical social worker. In 2017, Heidi became the first mental health therapist to be employed with a juvenile detention center in the state of Oklahoma. She now currently serves as the clinical assessment coordinator for Tulsa County Family Center for Juvenile Justice. And thank you both.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
She's just made work a living hell for her.
Please be sure to mute as you enter.
Are you ready for me to start? Yeah, okay. All right, well, thank you very much for coming, and I'm very thrilled to be here. And I've also brought two school-based social workers. One is based in the school, and she is also a school counselor, and the other is based in the school through an agency. And I thought that that would be a good way to start talking about school social work, since it's very diverse. If you like lots of different interesting days, you will always have it in a school. And remember, when you're working in a school, you're working in two kinds of systems. So it's a balance. So I'm going to ask Becca to start. She can introduce herself, tell who she's working for, and just give a little small.
Probably, yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
I'm not sure. I think probably everybody needs to mute until. Okay. All right. Okay, Becca, go ahead and introduce yourself and talk about what you do.
So as Dr. Brandt said, my name is Becca Lace. I am pursuing my clinical license. So I am currently employed by Grand Lake Mental Health Center, and I work in Pryor, Oklahoma at an elementary school. I work primarily with kids 4 through 12, but I do have a couple of adolescents that I see at the junior high. So something really that is unique to being, employed by an agency but based in a school is that there are several, as I'm sure you all know, several different systems that I work within. So I have the system of working within the school with admin and educators and counselors who are just an incredibly collaborative team to make sure that we provide all that we can at the school. So I do most of my therapy during the day with my students, but then also trying to figure out what it's like to exist in an agency where you are doing treatment plan updates and intakes for, incoming clients, and you're doing family meetings. And something that I'm really passionate about is seeing system level issues within an agency and making sure that we fix those. So it's a little bit unique in the sense that if I'm seeing that we need a training on a specific, therapy, or if I'm seeing that maybe there's some environmental, like work life, that isn't being balanced, especially with COVID, and that's something that I've been pushing for with coworkers. So, and of course, when you're employed by an agency, you have different expectations in terms of, just different HIPAA compliance and all of that. And so just making sure that you're really staying in touch with all of those different systems, that you make sure that you're abiding by all of the rules set by the agency, but you're also being present for your students that are in the schools.
And Becca, what's your favorite part of school social work?
Well, to me, the kids are at school, so I want to be where the kids are at. And as Dr. Brandt said, there is never a dull moment. There's always something happening. And I think I just love that I get to see kiddos both in the school, in their school environment where they are most of the day. And then I also get to work with the families. And so I get to kind of help them understand that there are different environments that our kiddos interact in on a daily basis. And those environments impact some of their behavior and some of the things that are going on. So it's really special to be in both of those environments so that I can kind of see the holistic perspective of each child.
And what relationship do you have with the school administrators?
So we meet on a monthly basis. It's myself. We have a behavior coach, a care coordinator, a family support provider, and then we meet with the school admin, and we sit, and we did this yesterday morning. We staffed the highest need kiddos. I gave as much as I can with confidentiality. I gave the perspective of just where each client was at that we're seeing a lot of needs from, and kind of troubleshooting and problem solving of how we can support them at school. Because I'm sure you all know there's a lot that kids are bringing into the school every day based on whatever home environment they're in. And so it's really important, especially for school admin and educators, to understand that sometimes kids are carrying a really heavy load that has nothing to do with the lesson of the day or anything that's happening at the school, but has everything to do with something that's happened at home. So it helps me advocate for my clients and my families, in the school admin, at least the school I'm at, is very receptive to what can we do? How can we be more trauma informed? And so that's an approach that we're working on next year as well, is doing more trauma informed training for the teachers at our school.
Thank you. Thank you. Chloe?
Hi, so my name is Chloe Beachy. I'm an LMSW working towards my LCSW as well. My role is a school counselor. That's my title. And I'm in a smaller school on the west side of Tulsa, so I'm kind of lucky in that way. I love the west side. They're the best. They're like a small town somehow in the middle of Tulsa, so just across the river. I love them. But similar to what Becca shared, I love working in schools because it is kind of in that like meso area where you're getting to see the macro and the micro. You're working with both. You get to see how the whole system impacts this one student. And a lot of times as mental health providers in a school, you get to have access to kind of tweak and change one piece of these systems. And we all know that when you change one piece, you change the whole system. And so it's really cool to get to see, for me, since I'm in the school counselor role, I do a lot of stuff that's like school-wide, grade-wide, or staff-wide. So I do a lot of prevention stuff that's every student has access to, trainings for staff, groups for parents, things like that. I get to kind of be really creative about how I use my MSW, which is fantastic. And it's what I wanted in a job when I graduated. And so I'm really lucky to have found this. I want there to be more of us. I'm always like, please come work in schools. Anytime I have social workers in front of me, I'm always like, please, we need that perspective, because looking at a student and trying to treat them in a vacuum, we know as social workers, just doesn't work. It's not effective. And they're bringing everything in from all these different environments. And so getting to be a school counselor and work in the school and have access to their classroom, their teachers, their schedule, things like that. I have a lot of access that I think sometimes embedded providers have to really work hard to build those relationships to get. And so it's really amazing to kind of get that right off the bat. When I start my day, I kind of get to tweak and play with a lot of stuff. Now, that also means that I have to have a lot of really strong boundaries, and I have to advocate for my role and what I bring to the table as an MSW. And so that's something that I wish I had known when I started my job, that I would be saying a lot of, well, I'm here to advocate for fill in the blank. But the more I do it, the more confident I feel in it. And I really love that I get to be the safe space for teachers and students and parents, and kind of be open to where there's a need, versus having some of the requirements of like billable hours and things like that that sometimes can dictate how your time is spent. So I get to really kind of create, the school is my oyster, but also, oh my goodness, the whole school is my oyster. That's overwhelming and also fantastic. So yeah, that's school counseling in a nutshell.
Chloe, could you talk a little bit about the difference between playing in the role of counseling, of a school counselor, and being certified as a school counselor? Because those are big differences, and you did that very differently. So I think it would be great for our audience to know how you went about that process.
Yeah, so I am certified as a school counselor now. I had to get alternatively certified, so I had to take a couple extra tests, which was a little bit of added stress, but now I am able to operate in that certified staff role within the district. So I do have access to some resources and things like that that I would not have had access to before. And because of that, I'm also able to have a little more influence at the administrative level as well. So that was kind of the route I took. So I'm a certified school counselor, but I'm also an LMSW. So I have both of those going for me.
And so what do you think the big difference is between you and Becca's work? I'm going to let her weigh in on this too, but there are some very interesting differences.
Yeah, so I think the primary difference, and I think both roles have so much value. I think one thing I like about my role is that I'm able to do some like school-wide assessments and interventions that sometimes can work as prevention for those problems that turn into those really kind of critical concerns, where I would be calling someone like Becca to get that outside advocate that's in there for that student and that's pulling them to do counseling, and that I know they're in a safe space for that long-term treatment. A lot of what I do is more short-term. It's going to be more time-bound. It's going to be more crisis-oriented, or like the lower level needs we have. Like we have a lot of anxiety right now. It's not clinical level anxiety, but it's anxiety. And so I get to work with those kids that are just nervous coming to school versus having students referred to me who are maybe not coming to school at all because the anxiety is at a clinical level. So that's kind of the primary difference. I get to do a lot more of that prevention piece, and then move to that more intensive counseling when it's needed versus having my entire caseload be those really kind of intensive cases, which thank goodness for Becca, because those roles are equally important for us.
And so Becca, what do you think the biggest difference is?
Yes, I think I'm very thankful for Chloe too. I have two incredible school counselors at Roosevelt, and we truly could not do what we do without them. I think, so I do, I don't want to assume what Chloe does throughout the day, but I do clinical therapy like the entire day, and I do family therapy, which is clinical work as well. We are limited in what we can do on a school systems level. That would really be something I would introduce to the school counselors, and they would have to carry that out. I'm more limited in that I do have to abide by my agency's, protocol and their standards. And so I do crisis work as well. But just like Chloe said, they're more like the school counselors would refer out to have this, kiddo that's really high needs. we need to get them in services. And then I would, do the screening, the intake, and then start services with them. So it's a little bit more like, it's a little stricter through an agency than maybe through school counseling. You don't have as much autonomy as you might if you were working as a school counselor.
And Chloe, I know you do groups, and that's been a big learning curve for you in terms of satisfaction as well as developmental stages and the things that you found out. So I'm going to ask Becca the same question, but tell us about some of the groups that you've done and how successful they've been.
So groups really scared me, I'll be honest, when I started, and that was something that I saw as a need. And especially, so I work in elementary school. I can't remember if I mentioned that, but I was especially kind of extra scared of the 3rd through 5th graders because they were just a little bit, they just kind of scared me, I'll be honest. This is a safe space. So, but when I started assessing for what kind of groups were needed and who the high need students were, it was mainly my 4th and 5th graders, and it was mainly 4th and 5th grade boys. And so I started a couple groups for them, and we were doing our coping cats and learning coping skills. And I was extremely apprehensive going in on how effective it would be. And I actually found that group in particular, 4th and 5th grade boys, if you give them something that they can own, and it's this way, we know this developmentally with all students, you give them something that they can have ownership in, that they feel like they're in charge of it. You give them some power over part of their life like that, and they will just run with it. And so within weeks, after kind of initially building that rapport, they were coming in every week like, okay, what's our lesson on today, Miss Beachy? All right, I'm going to go get our stuff. Okay, do we need to make copies? Like, they were totally on board. And it shocked me because these were some of the students that teachers were saying were impossible to reach, impossible to impact. We can't get them to do anything. And so over time, I really saw that a lot of these students really just needed that safe space to feel like they were in charge of something, to feel like they had a space that they were kind of determining how it would go. And so now that's one of my favorite things that I do is groups. So if you're in the MSW program or you're in the field and groups of kids scare you, I would encourage you to give it a shot because that's one of my favorite things that I get to do.
Hey, Becca, do you do any groups?
Yes, so I did a group back in the fall. So at one of the schools, not the one that I'm embedded at, but we had what we called a trauma learning classroom. And so we have a lot of kiddos that have been in and out of inpatient and that have been suspended quite often. And just, we were like, okay, systemically, like something is not working within the way that we have the classroom set up. And a lot of these clients had pretty severe triggers. And so I did a group with a group of boys. I think they were 4th and 5th primarily. And it is very intimidating. And you do really have to stay structured with kiddos that have a history of behavioral issues due to extensive trauma. But it was incredibly powerful because I don't think in a therapeutic setting, even with an inpatient, that those boys had been in a room where they had autonomy and that they were able to look to the person next to them and hear like, oh, like you went through something similar too, and I get to talk about this and it's okay. And in a room where they felt safe, and just like Chloe said, they get to kind of choose whatever activity. I mean, we present the activity, but they have choice within that activity, which is so important to kids that very often don't have choice in their life. And so that was incredibly powerful. And then this summer, we have a lot of teens that are LGBTQ plus and living in Pryor and around Pryor, Oklahoma, do not feel safe and don't feel as if they have others that they can relate to. And so that's something that a couple of therapists and I are going to do this summer so that they have that sense of community, because it's so incredibly important, especially for teenagers, to know that they have others that they can relate to and that they feel empowered to, own whoever they are. And it just puts them on such a better trajectory for mental and overall wellness.
Well, I thank you both very much. I'm sure that there's going to be a few questions. So if you'll hang around just for a couple more minutes, that might be great. Do we have any questions from the audience about school social work in general, or specifically for Becca and Chloe?
So I had posted some questions and I wanted to thank you for answering, because I was curious about the alternative certification process to get a counseling degree or a certificate. It's a counseling certificate.
Yeah, so it's a certified, yeah, it is a certification process. I was emergency certified through TPS when they offered me the position, which is how most would start that role with the school counselor, because unless you have a school counselor master's degree or a specific program like that. So I started emergency certified and then moved through the alternative certification process, which I just completed. And if you want to, I'm going to put my contact information in the chat so you can email me. I can send you kind of some step-by-step stuff if you're interested, because it can get a little litigious for sharing over Zoom.
Thank you. And Miss, how do you pronounce your name? Lace?
Yes, well done.
Thank you. So you mentioned the LGBTQ plus population in Pryor. Is there a support system for them put up in elementary all the way up through high school, or how does that look over there in Pryor?
That's a great question. We're still figuring out what that looks like. And so I have a couple of kiddos that I work with at the elementary school that have shared, their sexual orientation with me. And so we're kind of working on, we really have to be careful with protecting, obviously, their confidentiality, but also working on making sure that they do have a support system, whether it's their family or friends or a teacher. So we're primarily just working with the middle school and high school students right now. But we do want to start starting a little bit younger at the elementary school as well.
So what support system does the high school and middle school have? Is it organized?
Yeah, that's a great question. So a lot of them, we've done like family sessions with their families. So they have support through their family. We also have a couple of teachers that will check in with them and have done like clubs at school with them. And then we're doing a monthly session at our office with kiddos from all over the area and their therapists, so that they have kind of other people outside of their network that they can meet.
Well, thank you.
Absolutely.
Hey, well, I think our time is up and Heidi is on, so I will encourage Becca and Chloe to hang around, but I know that they have appointments, so feel free to stay as long as you'd like. And Alyssa, it's back to you. Thank you.
I'm just going to go right into Heidi. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Alyssa and Dr. Brandt. So a little bit about me and my history with OU. So I am an OU alum social work program. And so when I finished school, I actually was a school-based therapist. So it's a nice little transition. But during my time at OU, I actually interned at where I'm currently employed. So we were known back then as the Tulsa County Juvenile Bureau. And that's where I did my internship and fell in love with the work, working with justice-involved youth, working with adolescents. And when I was school-based, out of school, I worked at Hill High School. So working with a similar population. And then once an opportunity opened up, I came back to the Juvenile Bureau. And since then, we have built a new building downtown. We used to be down on Gilcrease Museum Road, and our building was just falling apart. We had outgrown it. It was not built for trauma-informed care and things like that. So we are about a year and a few months into our new facility, and I'm super excited to share with you guys what we do. And I have prepared a PowerPoint. I think it's a lot of information to understand juvenile justice and especially juvenile justice and social work. And I feel like that's something that, not very many people are familiar with. So I'm going to try to hit you guys with a lot of information here. And since I'll have it up, I don't know if I'll be able to see the chat. And so if I'm asking some questions, if you guys will just hop on the microphone and give me some feedback, or Alyssa, if you want to read some of the chat comments so that I'll be able to hear them. All right, so let's try to get this working. All right. Is everyone able to see that? Okay. And are you guys seeing the regular presentation, or are you guys seeing my presenter view?
The regular presentation.
Perfect. All right. So I'm just going to get right into it. So I am the clinical assessment coordinator for the Family Center for Juvenile Justice. And this is a beautiful mock photo actually of whenever we were building our new building, but it does look exactly like this. So we're at 5th and Archer downtown. We're right across the new Iron Gate, and we are near the Day Center. And so that's where we're located now. And I'm going to just jump into it here. So I want to talk a little bit about social perceptions. What words, thoughts, or feelings are commonly associated with or used to describe youth who are justice involved?
Delinquents.
I'll say troubled.
Mm-hmm.
They're bad kids.
Yeah, bad kids.
Probably pretty intelligent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this right here, these are words that we often hear a lot when working with youth that are justice involved. And, you know, these are words that have a lot of negative connotation. Jennifer, I know you said intelligent. Yeah, a lot of our kids are intelligent, but a lot of people choose to view them and define them by their actions and their history. And so we hear a lot of this, and we hear a lot of this within the systems that we work with. And so I just wanted to highlight how public opinion influences public policy, and keeping in mind, you know, labeling theory and how we label people and how that can impact, you know, their behaviors and their identity when we do that. So juvenile justice in early America, influenced by English common law. So during this time, children over the age of 7 were considered fully accountable by law. And so that meant if they committed crimes, they could be treated exactly like an adult would. So this incurred adult punishments, death sentences, removal from the home. So that was sort of the start of it, is children were treated as property, they were treated as adults. Separate trials for children did not occur until the 1870s, and we did not have our first juvenile court in the country until 1899, and that's Cook County, Chicago area. And Oklahoma was actually one of the first juvenile courts in the country as well. So 1909, that's the first juvenile court established in this state. And it was not until 1967 that the Supreme Court gave youth the right to due process. So before that, it was decisions were made for them. It was very much the view of the parents were unable to parent their kids, and so the state needed to step in and make decisions. So due process is giving the right to legal counsel, the right to voice, things like that. So that didn't happen until 1967. The punitive model, that sort of hit around the 1980s, and that sort of emerged with violent crime, reoffending. There was a lot of growing public concern. There was a lot of fear. And so the juvenile justice paradigm shifted towards a punitive model. And this was, a lot of the focus was on, you know, removing youth from society, holding them accountable, and the best interests of society were in mind rather than the best interests of the youth. And this was largely influenced by a doctrine called nothing works. And so even though this was not what research supported, this was something that influenced political opinion, influenced public opinion, which, like I said before, influences public policy. So this questioned if rehabilitation was even possible. and it inspired minimum mandatory sentences and aggressive practices. So crime continued to rise, and which to us, we see, okay, well, if crime's rising, then it's obviously not working. But the solution at the time was to be more punitive and to be more aggressive. And we still see these approaches today in many of our systems. We see it in some of the practices in Oklahoma. So what do these punitive practices look like? I definitely grew up with a lot of this in our schools and in our culture and in our language. Tough on crime, do the crime, do the time, get tough, scared straight programs. And this was the emergence of zero tolerance policies, which has led to a lot more youth entering the juvenile justice system for offenses that maybe they weren't violent, or maybe they were opportunities for intervention, but we chose to refer them to the juvenile justice system. So that has led to increased policing in schools, treating youth like adult offenders, punishment, isolation, and pain compliance, and then also juvenile life without parole and the death penalty in juvenile executions. And so I am curious, does anyone know what year the Supreme Court banned juvenile executions? So that did not happen until 2005. And Oklahoma actually was the last state to execute someone who committed a crime when they were a juvenile and given the death penalty. So in our history, we executed, I believe, 22 individuals in our country that committed crimes whenever they were juveniles. And as you can see on this map, it's definitely centered in certain geographical areas. Texas, of course, had the most, and geographically where we're at, you can see how maybe some of that has influenced our justice systems across the state. So we have moved forward with, some more rehabilitative practices, more research-based things, and moved away from the death penalty. We have also reviewed juvenile life without parole, which, looking at this map, Oklahoma still continues to use that as a potential sentence for juveniles. We do have active individuals who committed crimes while they were juveniles who were given life without parole. And, I find something interesting on here that Texas was, responsible for the majority of the executions, but they have actually banned the practice of juvenile life without parole. So the treatment model emerges, there is hope, and there has been, change and positive influence. So this began in the late 90s, early 2000s. So this was where we realized, okay, things are not working. So there was a lot more encouragement of research, evidence-based interventions, mental health services, education, and training. And so the main focuses were, we had to consider what were the origins of these youth's challenges and behaviors. And so there was consideration for impact of trauma, mental illness, and the greater environment on their development. And so we moved towards this treatment and rehabilitation versus punishment model. So what are the missing links, just so that we have an understanding of the youth that we work with? So adolescent brains continue to develop into adulthood. Their judgment and problem solving and decision making is not the same as an adult would be. 93% of detained youth report exposure to trauma. 65 to 70% of youth in correctional settings have at least one diagnosable mental health condition. And the prevalence of mental health disorders is 3 times higher than the general youth population. Nearly half of all students who enter residential juvenile justice facilities have an academic achievement level that is below the grade equivalent for their age. So we have a lot of things going on here that encapsulate justice involved youth, and a lot of issues that we need to address that are going to take multidisciplinary collaboration. We need a lot of different interventions. So what works? Like I said, collaboration across systems, across child and youth serving systems. We need early prevention and intervention, educational opportunities, skills development opportunities for youth, of course, mental health and outreach services, and some other things on here that I'll go through just for the sake of time. But you can see the push towards trauma-informed care, the push towards addressing mental health, intervening early. The research supports that we need to start as early as we can. So that's elementary schools, identifying, screening, referring to programs. We need prevention education in our schools. So positive youth development is something that I'm going to encourage everyone that wants to work with youth to get an understanding of, and it's just a theoretical foundation and model, and it guides a lot of what we do here at Tulsa County. It's an intentional pro-social approach that engages youth within their communities, schools, organizations, peer groups, and families in a manner that is productive and constructive. So we're not looking at adolescence as something that's, scary, there's adversity, there's risk. We're looking at it for opportunities for youth to learn and thrive. And so this, really gives an insight into, there's a lot of systems that have influence here. There's a lot of different interventions and approaches that we need to take when we're looking at youth behavior. The social work roles, if you're interested in working with justice-involved youth, there's lots of different things that are out there, whether or not, you'll be practicing with your bachelor's or your master's, different roles, mental health therapists, we have school-based therapists because we need services in schools. Within the court system, we have intake and probation counselors. We've changed our language. We don't have probation officers. We refer to them as probation counselors. They do treatment planning. There's also direct care staff. So if you work within a juvenile facility, if you work within detention, we have juvenile case managers, we need school social workers. So all of these different roles, there's so many different opportunities if you want to get involved in juvenile justice. Social work role, advocacy and policy. I've highlighted some of these things, but we need more prevention education in schools. We need to start earlier if we want to, divert some of these kids from entering into the system. We need to push for funding for mental health services and evidence-based practices and interventions. This goes back to that public opinion influences public policy. And so, part of our role as social workers is being advocates in sharing this information and, getting it out there and getting the right people on board to promote the right services. We need to revise our policies that might be dangerous, harmful, or inhumane, increase educational opportunities, more accountability. We need policies that support collaborative relationships with youth. That is the number one thing that will get you far with working with youth, is that collaborative relationship. Give them voice and choice, especially adolescents. That will, get their buy-in when it comes to treatment. That's so important. So what's happening in Tulsa County with this, paradigm shift? I'm super proud to be a part of this system. We are doing things that are a lot different from some of the other juvenile justice agencies in the state. So something that's prioritized for us is trauma-informed practices, or we support trauma training for all staff. And like I said, we changed the way we communicate. We changed the way that we refer to different positions. We don't have detention officers. We have detention counselors. This changes the way we communicate and interact with youth because we want to reduce re-traumatization in this system. So use of trauma-informed language. So we don't refer to them as inmates. We have residents within our juvenile detention center. They're not criminals, they're juveniles. So different things like that goes a long way as far as how you treat youth. We have a PREA certified detention facility, and PREA is the Prison Rape Elimination Act. So that is something that is within our adult facilities. So that gives guidelines for you know, the way we provide services, the way we supervise youth, the way that we interact with youth to reduce incidents of, you know, sexual abuse and trauma. And, you know, and last I checked, we were the only juvenile detention center in the state that had PREA certification. So treatment planning for youth under court supervision, if they are referred to probation, probation counselors do risks and needs assessments. They identify, you know, what supports are needed, try to get the family involved, try to get youth into counseling if it's needed. So that's sort of how we approach rehabilitation. And also youth access to mental health assessment, treatment, and outreach services at no cost to youth and families. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later, probably the next slide. But this picture here, this prevention, diversion, intervention, and empowerment, those are sort of the guiding philosophies for us and part of our mission statement. So the clinical mental health team, so that is the department that I am under. And this is a photo of my team, and I love these guys and would be able to do what I do without them. And of course, not in this picture is the support of our wonderful interns, which I think I have 3 listening right now. So, hey guys. But these are, you know, the services that we provide to youth involved in our juvenile justice system. You know, risk screening and assessment. We provide therapy, psychoeducation, case management. We support multidisciplinary collaboration. So everything we do, we're involved with intake, probation, DHS workers. We get families involved. This is, you know, how we need to be approaching treatment. So mental health services in juvenile detention. So Tulsa County was the first juvenile justice system in the state to employ a full-time mental health therapist in its juvenile detention center. And that was me. And since then, we've actually grown. So we have 2 full-time therapists in our detention center now, and I've moved into a different role. But this has given youth access to individual, family, and group therapy. Our therapists train staff, and they're constantly providing therapeutic support and, you know, educating staff and coaching them through interactions or through difficult situations. We've started mental health and suicide risk screening for all youth upon admission, crisis intervention, aftercare, and reentry planning. And just some numbers, of course, you know, we don't know if it was direct impact of having mental health services, but just looking at the numbers of room confinement from 2016, before we had any in-house mental health services, to 2017, there was 40% reduction in the hours of room confinement in the detention facility. So something with working with justice involved youth that is key is family engagement. We need to support, you know, having the right stability and structure outside of the justice system, outside of the detention facility. We developed this program from feedback with youth that, you know, they say, I go to these treatment facilities, or I, you know, come here and I work really hard on myself in therapy, and I go home and everything's the same. And so, you know, they're wanting family engagement. They're wanting to work on relationships. They want to work on what's going on in their environment. So we were the first in the state to provide a therapeutic family engagement and resiliency program for detention youth. So before we did this program, youth in detention were only allowed to have visitation with 2 adult caregivers. So they're only allowed those 2 people on their list. We implemented this program because we understand that incarceration impacts the entire family unit, not just the parents. And so with this program, it's based off of Strengthening Families curriculum. So we utilized that and gave youth an opportunity to see their families every week and be able to sit down and have dinner with them and do this skill building and learn some of those skills that they can use when they go home. So some of the outcomes that we saw with this: improved family relationships, family support and communication, and we also saw behavioral impacts, so reduction in room confinements and critical incidents. And of course, because of COVID-19, we can't have people in our facility as often as before. And so we started delivering this curriculum virtually over Zoom in response to COVID-19 restrictions, because we saw, the benefit of it. And I've attached this poem here. It's one of my favorite things that has come out of family group. And this was a youth that we worked with. And the evening that he and his family graduated successfully from this program, he had written this poem to read to his family and the other families that were graduating. And it's just something that I will never forget. I just love this so much. And so that's all I have to say as far as juvenile justice. Here's my information, because I know we are limited on time, but I do want to be able to get to everyone's questions and interact with you guys. So if you want to connect, absolutely reach out.
Thank you, Heidi. And I went ahead and put the CEU link in the chat if anybody needs to fill that out for today. And then if anybody has questions for Heidi, you can ask them now or go ahead and connect with her before we take our break.
Yeah, do we have any questions?
I do. Thank you, Heidi. I wanted to say thank you. And then another question I had, do the tribes ever do anything to act with their, if any Native American youth are there?
We do have American Indian youth that, come through our system. I don't know if we have any specific programming right now, but as far as treatment planning, that is something our workers try to consider. So if we do have Native youth, what support services, what mental health services, we want to give them the treatment that supports their needs. And so that is something that is considered whenever we do treatment planning. I know I've had some discussions with Indian Healthcare Resource Center about bringing some youth programming into our detention facility, but that has sort of paused because of COVID. So if that answers your question.
Thank you.
Thank you guys again. Well, we are going to take a 15-minute break before we have our licensure panel of MSW grads from OU that have gone on to get their LCSW. They will be presenting on those licensure steps. And so it'll be the same Zoom link. So if you guys want to take a break and then join us back at 2 o'clock. Thank you.